Hello there. Welcome to today's daily encouragement. Glad you're here, and I'm glad to be here, and I hope that whatever information I'm able to share with you guys today that is thought-provoking and it convicts you in your heart to seek inward and make those changes and improvements that God calls us to. The first question I want to ask you guys today is, who of you like superheroes? Who among you have always loved a specific hero since childhood? Maybe Incredible Hulk or Superman. Maybe it's a villain of a superhero comic, because they have some cool powers too. But who have you looked to that has enticed you? And one of the questions I have thought about is, why are superheroes so enticing? What about them keeps us captivated, that keeps the movies so high paid in the box offices and keeps the comic books so successful? And I kind of wonder about the characteristics of them and their fight for glory and their honor that they uphold, and they fight for the troubled and the weak. And I think that alone is already pretty cool, but I think there's something more to them as well. And for me, my specific favorite superhero since childhood has been Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Man, aside from all those other things that a hero has, he is a unique character because he has a lot of troubles that he endures. He's a timid teenager. He's not really popular with the kids at school. They tend to pick on him and cast him aside. And he has a lot of patience required of him to put up with that, as well as knowing that he can pummel them because he has super strength. So I always viewed him as someone that he was average to the normal eye, to the public eye, but he was so much more above average when he went to do his calling and using the powers that he obtained. And this is one of the first original, most commonly known issues of the series, and it's introducing him, and I find the text on here interesting. It says, "Though the world may mock Peter Parker, the timid teenager, it will soon marvel at the awesome might of Spider-Man." And you can see him carrying off a criminal with all the other criminals looking by, and that's what Spider-Man does. He fights crime, and he stands for the weak. He does what's right, and even when it's inconvenient, and he causes him to miss his college classes. He's late to dates all the time. He misses out events because he recognizes the bigger sacrifice, or the sacrifice for the bigger value and what's really important in life. And I know it's all make-believe, but I think there's some value to fictional stories, fictional instances. I think that they shouldn't be immediately dismissed. I think they can teach us something. And when it comes to heroes, I wonder about Jesus could be labeled as a superhero, and the ultimate one at that. He stands for what a hero stands for. He stands for the weak. He stands for the people in need. He stands for those that can't fight for themselves. He fights for them in so many different ways. He is the voice to the voiceless, and he fought for our salvation. If you think about it, when he opposed culture, he fought for what? For justice, for grace, for forgiveness of the people, because he knows that we're sinners, and he knows that the people were maybe flawed, although they also deserved grace, and that the people condemning the flawed had just as much flawed within them. It just wasn't in the spotlight at the time. And I view that as something that's what a hero does. And his pure sacrificial nature is a guideline to us, and probably a guide to the people that created superheroes and modeled that after. And then they added all the bells and whistles and the cool costumes and their superpowers. And that's all great, but Jesus had the power of God, which is already super, so he was the ultimate hero. Now, there's a few verses that I want to go over that give us a guideline of how do we know that God intended for Jesus to be our hero, and how does God also call us to be heroes for each other in this day and age? And the first verse that comes to mind is in Micah chapter 6, and it's labeled the indictment of the Lord. And it says this: He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, he's saying here, O man, and implying all of mankind, and that's us. I mean, it's labeling pretty much everybody that here is the requirement, and these are some of the requirements given to us. Jesus did this, so we're called to do this as well, to do what is just, love with kindness, and humbly walk with God. That's what a hero does, and that's what Jesus did. And another instance is, I wonder, okay, now that we know that there's this higher calling, it's easy to talk about justice and upholding it, but it's a big challenge. We live in an unjust world, church, and it takes courage, it takes bravery to stand against that. And I think one of the most powerful verses recommended to me by a Gresham police officer we all know and love, who he reads it every day before he goes out to face the dangers of this world. And it is labeled the Warrior's Prayer in Psalm 91. And I won't read the whole thing to you, but I encourage you to read it all. It is very powerful. It's a very impactful testimony before going out to war. And there are physical examples of arrows raining down and holding up your shield. Think of those metaphorically and what those actually mean. It starts off very powerful, saying, "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." I want to think that we can fight and earn to rest in the shadow of the Almighty. That's something that would be probably the best rest we've all seen in a long time. And it's comforting to know that God is over us. He continues to say, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust." God is our fortress. He is our refuge. He is not a firm, strong dictator or a parent that just gives you commands to follow or laws that can't be broken and rules with an iron fist, and that's all he is. As some people are corrupted in that view, unfortunately, and thinking that being a Christian and a disciple means that you have to follow this long list of commands, and if you don't, then you're forever condemned and you're a sinner. That's not true. God made us, and he wants a relationship with us. He calls us to seek refuge in him because he is our fortress. We do trust him. And when we don't, we know some of what that looks like, and we can see it in other people around us. And it's not a safe place. So I see here the setup for this prayer of, God, be with me while I fight. Be with me while I strive to seek your refuge. I look at Psalm 94, 16 and 17, and it says, "Who will rise up for me against the wicked? Who will take a stand for me against evildoers? Unless the Lord has given me help, I will soon have dwelt in the silence of death." Reading this passage, I see two paths in our life. The first path that's most commonly known and taken of war and hatred and pain and suffering, and those are all masked by short-term pleasures and the things that are so convenient in this world that everybody goes throughout and they're just wanting to take everything that comes their way, drugs and pornography and sex at no limitations. And there is a clear description of what that world looks like. It is the wicked, it is the evildoers, and we are surrounded by them. God did not create this world to be a utopia. That is heaven is the peace that we strive to have, and the kingdom of heaven is what we are aiming for. But while we are here, it is a challenge. And although that could be a discouraging thought, I would combat that with how Jesus responded. I think a useful passage would be Ecclesiastes. The whole chapter of number 1 and number 3 both have a clear example of the struggle that Solomon was thinking through of this world, of where he goes from labeling it as meaningless and all just toil under the sun to recognizing there's a season for everything and a time for all events under the sun. And he comes full circle to the end of the end of the book, and it's a very plain, simple, but extremely challenging command of how to find happiness and fulfillment in this life. Follow God and obey his commands. Now that's an encouragement to me from the wisest man to ever walk the earth, blessed from the wisdom of God. And I think that's something that we can all look to as a model as we seek and strive to be like Jesus. So, another example of how following a hero can look like is this historical cross right here. This cross represents a lot of special connotations for a lot of people. It obviously is the cross to represent how Jesus defeated the Romans' tool for cruel murder and turned it into a symbol of death, into a symbol of life and hope. The story behind this specific cross, Mr. Greg Woods had a very cool tradition when I was in the youth group to bring the youth group to, there was many different hikes that I remember. One of them I remember was Angel's Crest, and we would all take that big, well-running bus all the way up there, and we would sing songs on the way, we would fellowship along the way, and when we got to our location, we would all unload, we would bring this cross, we would prop it up at the base of the mountain or the hill or the trail, and we would sing more songs, and we would pray, and Greg would guide our hearts and minds to focus on God and what Jesus really means to us, and the relationship between God and Christ, and the relationship that's meant to be extended to us. Now, we would, in silence, all the way up the hike, which usually was a pretty steep and challenging one, we would be in silence, and we would pass this cross to pick it up and bear it, and really understand the meaning of picking up your cross and bearing it daily. We passed it from one person to another, individually carrying this burden. And when we reached the top, we had a blissful sunrise to look at. We were all relieved at the extraneous hike that was over. And we propped this up, and with the sunrise shining on it, with the birds chirping, with the fellowship of one another, singing praises on an early Sunday morning and taking communion together, those are some of the fondest memories I have, and I'm thankful and grateful for those. And this has transcended through decades of people signing their name on it who were a part of that. I see names like Kobe Poole, Alana Seal. We got Zach Haley here a couple times. We have James Allen. I see Robert Haley over here. And I see Matt Westonsko. I have my name right under here. And it just floods back memories. And I know all of these people have the same memories. And I hope they're watching today as well. And my encouragement is that we remember this example, that we all signed this, we all were a part of this, to be a hero. To be a hero for one another in that time, but also remember who our true hero is Jesus, and that we all wanted to replicate and be like him and experience things that he has as best we could. I think that's a written testimony right here. I think it's a written testimony on our hearts. And I pray that is glorifying to God, and that we can seek to do things like that story throughout our daily lives. It might not be a tremendous hike and a day-long adventure. It might be a conversation with someone that we know needs the gospel. I think if we really think hard of how can I serve Jesus today? How can I be like Jesus today? How can I love like Jesus today? Then we in fact will aim to be the very hero that he set for us. I encourage you, church, to do the same, because Jesus is the only hero that will save us from this world, and he calls us to seek and find him. I love you, church, and I pray that you have a blessed week.